Hi everyone, I'm Gabrielle Francis, a recent graduate from the New School where I was both a double major in visual studies and global studies with a minor in race and ethnicity. I'm a queer Indo-Caribbean decolonial scholar, writer, artist, organizer, and healer. My multidisciplinary work centers intersectionality, healing, ancestry, and fostering our radical imaginations, grounded and rooted in abolition and liberation. My presentation today is a meditation on the work of contemporary artists and scholars of indentured descent, including myself, Suzanne Persad, Andil, Gosine, and Renulka Maharaj, and the possibilities that our work opens up around memory and space. I use mixed media art as a way to approach, understand, and reimagine Coolitude ancestry. Following the framework of negritude and creolite, Coolitude is a term coined by the scholar and poet called Turboli, and is a framework that honors hybridization and the constantly ever-changing redefining of indentured laborers and their descendants' relationship to India and what it means to be Indian in their respective adoptive homelands. The word coolie, however, is marked as an ethnic slur. The dictionary definition is unskilled labor, and the term historically became synonymous and used as a slur against indentured Indians. Although coolie has been reclaimed by descendants of indentured laborers, the respectful and responsible way to describe Caribbean nationals with East Indian ancestry is through the use of the term Indo-Caribbean. However, if you are a descendant of this ancestry, then it is your choice. The framework Coolitude centers on the harsh and violent realities and conditions of the New World that indentured Indians were subjected to on the plantations following the abolition of slavery in the British colonies. The mediums of the artists and scholars I talk about are mixed between performance, poetry, paint, and photography. As a decolonial scholar, I value and treat these mixed mediums as equally important forms of knowledge. Radical imagination is central to decolonial practices. It disrupts settler colonial logics of linear and heteronormative time and space. Fostering our radical imaginations and dreams to choose a future beyond the colonizing gaze is an integral part of decolonization. It changes and opens up the possibilities of indigenous land and life. In order to bring other futures into this reality and consciousness, we need to imagine and dream them. To know and feel they are tangible and possible. This is how I approach radical imagination and how I approach art as an opening to both our histories and possibilities. Contemporary Indo-Trinidadian artist Renulka Maharaj confronts colonial postcards of indentured Indian women in her artistic practice and recent exhibition Pelting Mangoes. Her work is often autobiographical and investigates themes of history, memory, religion, and gender, and how they inform identity. She often works with photography, installation, research, and travel. The postcards are a visual archive of indentured Indian women in Trinidad dressed head to toe in East Indian jewelry, clothing, and many postures and expressions, shot by British photographers and printed on tourist postcards circulated in Britain from the 1870s to the 1890s. The postcards were visual testaments to the effectiveness of the colonial rule, depicting Indo-Caribbean women as an extension of the exotic but safe marketing of the Caribbean. The postcards marked Indo-Caribbean women as imports and commodities. The abundance of jewelry suggested they had done well to leave India. The depiction also emphasized that they do not belong to the land, neither the islands nor India. The attached captions of the postcards helped British consumers identify and stereotype these women successfully and sexualize an ethnic type of coolie belles. This narrative and image directly feeds the fetishization and exotification of Caribbean islands and women. I argue that these postcards were an invention of the coolie women, and that this invention, depiction, and sale of coolie women prescribed an ethnic, gender, and sexual identity onto them. And this invention enforces an intensely violent, compulsory heterosexuality because of the extreme gender imbalance and heightened sexual desire for indentured women, therefore both repressing and controlling sexuality in dysfunctional ways. This narrative allows for coolie women to be dismembered, abused, and murdered for just being coolie women. The jewelry in the postcards were cited by colonial officials as the source for murders by machetes. Machetes were tools of the plantation. It was then turned on these women's bodies and used in instances to claim these women's bodies parts such as noses, ears, and arms. The same weapon is still used today in cases of intimate partner violence within Indo-Caribbean communities. In this exhibition, Renulka reimagines Coolitude ancestry in quite literally an illuminating way through the use of acrylic paint, glitter, and rhinestones. The care she puts into this exhibit evidently is the care of a descendant honoring their ancestors. Her attention and intention to the details carried through to the names of the pieces, where she challenges the anonymity of these women in the postcards by naming each of these pieces after many women in her family. These women become, as Suzanne Persad writes, hyper-visible and even sparkle, which are two words I've never heard Indo-Caribbean women described as until now. What's unique and captivating about Renulka's practice is the way it transmutes the painful and neutralized colonial violence of the black and white postcards and returns agency that is historically stolen from Indo-Caribbean women through the use of mixed media colors. She shows them as they are, beautiful and bright, and it makes it hard to take your eyes off of these women with a different light and intention than the postcards themselves. She finds a way to both resist and reinvent the postcard's colonial gaze. While talking about her work, she asks, I wonder how would they represent themselves? Would they find kinship with me and the other women in the photographs that I've reworked? These questions are evidence of her deep care and attention to the life of these women beyond the colonial gaze, including her own. These are sentiments, imaginations, and conversations I share as a descendant of indentured laborers as well, and it wasn't until I came across these postcards that I gained access to the history of Indo-Caribbeans. I reject all the limitations of the colonial gaze, and Renulka's work is evidence of our possibilities, our imaginations, and resistance and reinventions. Suzanne Persad is a contemporary Indo-Jamaican scholar, writer, and award-winning poet. She was born and raised in the Bronx, New York, to parents from Kingston, Jamaica. She was also a member of Jahaji Sisters, the first Indo-Caribbean organization committed to ending gender-based violence. Suzanne has organized in social justice movements for over a decade. Her writing and scholarship has prioritized Indo-Jamaican histories as an excluded history within the histories of indenture and Indo-Caribbean narratives. I'll be referencing two excerpts from her poem, Ancestral Coda. In the excerpt, Suggestions from the British National Archives of Kew, she writes about the constant displacement or deleting of Coolie ancestry. The isolation and constant rewriting of Coolie identity by empire is emphasized at the end of the poem in, quote, note, if you continue to receive this message, the empire cannot bother to digitize your blood. Indo-Caribbean herself, Suzanne is visualizing her Coolitude ancestry through this poem. What she brings to light is that there are openings to redefining, rewriting, and recreating Coolie identities through the negligence of the British Empire. Persad emphasizes the space and ability we have to imagine differently and that we always have had. We have a responsibility to shape our lives with our ancestral knowledge and reorient our relationship to time and space just like our ancestors did through the Coolie Odyssey. The other excerpt at the Coolie Depot emphasizes the visceral markings and feelings and sufferings of the Indo-Caribbean body. In section 3 of this poem, Persad writes, borders map bodies, telling us where we begin, where we're allowed to end. Maimed or winged empire, the great neutralizer of the body. What does it mean to have your body neutralized? Is that all the body can possibly be? She writes of the visceral, painful, real, and intergenerational experiences of coolies on the ship and plantations. While some of it is difficult to read because we are quite familiar with the experiences of these acts of violence within our own families, homes, and on ourselves, there is power in naming the experience directly like Suzanne does. Indo-Caribbean communities have suffered in silence from the shame of being of indentured descent and being defined as and limited to unskilled labor. She challenges this shame and silence through her poetry. In section 4, she writes, mispronounced names, markings on skin, traced to a place only existing in the mythopoetics of blood and imagination. This line brings us back to the space of imagination that Indo-Caribbeans are familiar with and often exists within and because of. Andil Gosine is a contemporary Indo-Trinidadian artist and scholar. His work interrogates what identity means in a fractured history of movement and migration as a descendant of indentured laborers. I'll be referencing his performance Our Holy Waters in Mine at the Museum of Latin American Art, where he emphasizes time traveling. The performance is composed of two parts and are, as Gosine says, simultaneous enactments, even if done years and coasts apart. In the first enactment, Andil places etched mason jars of water with names of different waterways on the floor and hands out flowers to audience members. He describes this as a story of survival, of the optimistic drive of the migrant. In the second enactment, his mood grows dark and he pelts the rest of the flowers on the floor and slowly creates a bed to die. He is speaking to the encounters with brutality that on many days make many of us want to surrender. Happening simultaneously and constantly, Gosine's performance courageously talks about the brutality of indenture and how it continues to live with us generationally rather than being a single moment in time and space. The question, what happens after indenture, permeates through his performance. We are forced to contemplate the multiple and harsh realities of crossing waterways. The etched mason jars represent the several crossings that indentured Indian laborers took on their first voyage from India to the Caribbean plantations. The mason jars are symbolic of preservation, and his performance offers a formalized acknowledgement and preservation of the sea traveled by seas that created the Indo-Caribbean identity. What's personally most moving about Gosine's performance is his brutal honesty about the very limited and destructive forms of agency indentured laborers have had or had lack of access to. Surrendering can either be metaphorical or literal. That duality speaks to the multiplicity of Coolitude identity and ancestry. Gosine's performance creates space for us to reflect on the lived experience and brutality indentured laborers and their descendants endure as we watch him both live and die in his performance. His piece also emphasizes a temporality, but most importantly asks us what's next. The last artist and scholar I'll be talking about is myself and my piece titled 206-21, Queer Altar, Mixed Media Performance. This is my second mixed media performance of a current series of performing public altars around New York City. The altars are always composed of a mirror, an active invitation and responsibility to the viewers, and are decorated uniquely and intuitively to each's historical and personal context and location. Colonial violence borders in and marginalizes queer and Caribbean identities, cultures, and ancestries. I am attempting to shift and remap these borders, reflecting the beautiful possibilities of queer Caribbean folks' lives. The title 206-21 is the ratio of men to women on the Fatel Razak, the first ship in 1845 to bring indentured laborers from India to Trinidad. I emulate Trinidad and Tobago's flag colors on the edges of the mirror, layering them with red, white, and black rhinestones. I write in the center of the mirror, 206-21, I wonder how many of you were queer. This question is an attempt to intervene and open up the possibilities of having queer ancestors, even amidst the severe gender imbalance proportions of Indo-Caribbean ancestry. I offer 6 candles to the altar, the colors of the pride flag. I then offer the altar holy power on an offering tray. The celebration known as Pagua was introduced to Trinidad and Tobago through indentured laborers. Holy power is used to celebrate Pagua. It is celebrated in the months of March and April, recognizing the beginning of spring, associated with the ideas of rebirth, renewal, reconciliation, and blossoming love. I offer this sweetness to the queer ancestors. On the same offering tray, I rested flowers around the rim. Lastly, I lit 2 coconut incense and lit the candles from red to purple. The mirror reflected the sun along with the writing on my roof, the Trinidad flag and rhinestones, candles, flowers, and burning incense. This performance is intended to emphasize temporality. The wind blows, the holy powder, and the incense burning both reflect time passing. The sun setting reflects the end of a cycle and preparation for a new one. The candle flames each dance their own rhythm, and a butterfly, symbol of ancestors, fly past me as I perform this altar piece, a gentle reminder that our ancestors are indeed still with us, especially the queer ones. Each of these artists and scholars of indentured descent question and reimagine what we can learn from their ancestry that has been invented through colonization as unskilled labor. What can we learn about the possibility of our relationship to memory and space, and how through these possibilities do we foster our radical imaginations and dreams of choosing a future beyond the colonizing gaze? Each of their work offers possibilities and imagination, shifting borders, time traveling, and reorienting ourselves through ancestral knowledge. The colonial gaze limits and keeps us captive. Our own imaginations are what will set us free. The Coolitude framework honors radical imagination, multiplicity, in-betweenness, and transformation.